In this video, you will learn how to build a small microservices system that has 4 services, a single load balancer, and 3 identical Node.js applications that we have built before in this channel. If you're interested to know how this is done, stay tuned. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Hussein, and in this channel we discuss all sorts of software engineering by example. So if you want to become a better software engineer, consider subscribing, hit that bell icon so you get notified every time I upload a new video. That said, let's just jump into microservices. Okay, so this application that you're seeing right now, I'm gonna reference the code below, guys. I'm gonna start building on this. Essentially, it's a simple Node.js application that I have Dockerized, and we have talked about how exactly we did that, how we moved this application into a Docker container. I'm gonna reference the video here, right? I'm not gonna go through details. It's a very simple application. It's an express application. It takes an environment variable and some REST endpoints, and literally just echo back the application ID. And it's very critical to know that so we can identify which microservices are we hitting. Okay, so that's essentially what it does. Okay, and I'm listening always to port 9999. All right, and in the Docker file, I am exposing that 9999 port. Okay, and when you spin up a new Docker container from that image that you have built from this Docker container, you can specify which port your host can map to. Okay, and we start doing all this goofy stuff, right? We spin like 3 of these images, but every time we have to expose it to the host, which is kind of ugly, right? Because every communication is going through the host, right? It's like you're mapping this stuff, right? So how actually we can build all of this stuff in its own bubble microservices stuff, right? Because microservices are awesome, right? Who doesn't want their application to run actually slower and become harder to debug, right? Everyone wants that, right? All right, people are gonna get pissed. All right, oh yeah, I'll save my opinions about microservices later in another video. But yeah. So what we need to do here, essentially, we no longer need to expose the port, because guess what? These will be completely isolated internal containers that we as an external entity have no access to. What we will have access to is the load balancer that will load balance those puppies, okay? And what load balancer will we use? What is the best load balancer available out there? Wrong. It's not Nginx. It's HAProxy. Okay. Again, this is subjective, but I like HAProxy better because it's just easier. Okay. Right. This video is gonna get a lot of dislikes. All right. So let's get started. All right. So I'm gonna remove that part. I am going to change this thing. So if you provide me, when you spin up this container of this beautiful image, the app ID becomes the port that we're gonna listen to. So for example, if I spin up this container with 1111 as a container, as an application ID, that will be the listening port, okay? And it will just change that port, so we'll just know that, right? That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna spin up a bunch of stuff. So that's the first change we're gonna do. Yeah. Once we do this change, how about we actually build this puppy, all right? Build that Docker container. How do we build Docker images, guys? Docker build -t. I don't know why it's still -t, right? For the image name, and let's call it node app, and then dot, right? And it's built. So node app image is now this application. That's the first part. The second part is I have my application. How about we actually build my HAProxy container? An HAProxy container, obviously, in order to build an HAProxy container, you would need a configuration. So how about we create a folder called HAProxy? And then inside this folder, we're gonna create an HAProxy.cfg, which means a container, the configuration for HAProxy. What is the configuration for HAProxy? Let's do a front end that is HTTP, let's call it, and then bind on port IT, because it's famous, right? And let's make the mode is HTTP, and let's do a timeout. We don't really need timeout, do we? But sure, timeout, A client timeout is 10 seconds. Bad, by the way, but sure. Use backend all, and then we're gonna define a backend. We're gonna call it all. And then here's the beauty part. How many services would we want to spin up? How many microservices? Remember, the whole architecture will be spin up in its own bubble. So it's gonna have their own IP addresses, their own host names, and we're gonna craft the host names right here, and then we're gonna build the actual microservices using Docker Compose, which is an awesome tool. So let's do that. So server S1, the first server is gonna call it S1. And what is the host name? We have no idea. We're gonna make up names right now. Okay, I'm gonna call it Node App 1, and it's listening on port 1111. Okay. Again, we're assuming that because we need to build this thing. We need 3 of those. Okay, 3 of those. S2, and S3, 3333, and this is the host name, guys. Right? So there will be a host name in the container that is called Node App 1. And you might say, how do you do that? We're going to do that with Docker Compose in a second, right? So now we have the configuration. We have the HA proxy ready. We have Node.js, the image ready. Everything is ready. What's missing? The Docker Compose itself. So let's go ahead and create, not in this folder, it's actually in the parent one. I always, man, this is always a problem with this. Docker compose.yaml, right? We gotta drag it up, right? If anyone knows how we actually go back to the root, because I have no idea, right? Every time I go back, I create a folder, it always creates in the subfolder. No, never mind. So Docker compose is essentially a YAML file that you give it to Docker Compose, this tool, which is Docker. By the way, you have to have Docker for this tutorial. It goes without saying. Okay? And it takes that file and spin up everything in its own bubble of a network, internal network. And you can ask it to expose certain ports. And that's what we're interested in. Because guess what? The load balancer, which is SSL proxy, that's the only thing that we need to see publicly. Me as the runner of this application. So let's start this. Start with the version 3. That's the first thing you do. I'm using version 3, the latest and greatest of them all, okay? And then we're gonna have a bunch of services, right? And here's the cool part about this. Each service that you define becomes a host name, becomes a container that has a host name that you define. So I'm gonna create one service, one container called LB, right? That's the first container. That's the load balancer. I need another container called Node App 1. Why? This is the puppy, Node App 1. That's another container, right? I need another one, App 2, DJ Khaled, App 3. Look at that. So we need, these are my 4 services. 1, 2, 3, 4. Are these enough? No, sir. Because you gotta tell me this first container, what its config, what the heck is it? Well, it has an image of HA proxy, right? That's the public image of HA proxy, at least, right? And you need to tell me what ports do you want exposed, because that's the only accessible container to the outside world. So, well, we're gonna do ports, and then we'll do exactly like you're spinning a new container, right? I am going to use 8080, right? Is that what we used? Yes, we listened in the container and port 8080, so that's it. And I want to expose, right, port 8080 on my host. So you can change this to 80, for example, if you're fancy, right? But you just keep it, I want to keep it just as it is. The next thing is volumes. And the volume here is actually very interesting because HA proxy requires the configuration, which we wrote. But how do we pass it along? Well, we need to actually specify the path, right? Well, whereas us, which is ./HA proxy, that's my folder, I want to map this folder to this is fixed, user local etc HA proxy. This guy, which is moi, this folder, right, which has this file, maps to this, which is a constant in the container. Sweet. That will map it up. That will pick up the configuration. Hopefully we don't have any errors. It's going to complain that we don't have timeouts, but sure. How about NodeApp? NodeApp required an image. And guess what? Our image is called NodeApp. That's exactly what we built. Remember, guys? Okay. Well, what else does it require, guys? It requires some environment variables, right? Because remember, we need to pass app ID, which is app capital ID, so we can listen to the port, right? So to do that, you do environment, right? And then you hit enter and then dash, literally just do app ID equal the environment variable. So in this case, 1111. So that's my first Node app. It's gonna listen to port 111 and it's gonna be identified at 1111. So if I make a GET request, it's gonna say, hey, I am application ID 1111. Sweet, guys. How do I do the next? Well, copy and paste. Copy and paste. Still the same application, but this guy is 2222. And this guy, same image, but this guy is 3333. And guess what? Just like that, your Docker Compose is ready to rumble. Let's do that. So how do we actually build that Docker Compose? Well, you go to terminal and make sure you're in the same folder and then do docker-compose up. If you run docker.compose, it's gonna look for a file called dockercompose.yaml and it's gonna run that thing and look at that beautiful stuff. Look at this. Look at this. It's gonna give some error. Errors found in configuration, fatal errors. What is my errors? Well, my configuration, first of all, I didn't map the mode. Has to be the same mode. That's the first thing for sure. And we have also a typo, back end all right, so we fixed the mode, we fixed the typo, and then all we have to do is essentially go here, and it's always a good idea to do docker compose down. So that means bring them services down, and then you do docker compose up. Let's see. Do we get an error? Ooh, looking good. Yeah, it's complaining that we have timeouts. Sure, whatever. Now we're listening to port 1111, 2222, 333. These are floating containers, and we have a beautiful HA proxy load balancer that is loading a layer 7, essentially playing on the layer 7 and just bouncing things. How about we actually test that thing? Are we full of BS or actually this thing is working? I'm gonna do localhost, IT, and then hit enter. And look at that, app 1. We got a result from app 1. And if we refresh, right, that will send a request to another HA proxy that will essentially use the pool to swap to the other container and then refresh another container and so on. 333.111. So what algorithm is this called? It's called round robin. You can use IP hash, you can do sticky sessions, all that fancy stuff. How do I, Hussein, I have million requests. I need to spin up another container. How do we do that? Well, not hard at all. Well, sir, we're gonna spin up another one. DJ Khaled, another one, right? S4, we're gonna spin up another container. Well, we added it to the config, right? S4 is now node app 4. Go back to the YAML and then to copy. And God, I hate YAML because copying and pasting doesn't actually align correctly. This is node app 4. Then we do kill this thing. And then when you kill it, it's a good idea to do a detach, but I like to actually see what's going on, right? When you stop this container, it's gonna tear down everything and then do docker compose down. Baby gonna down. What year is this? Apparently this is not 2020. All right, we go back and then refresh. Do we see 4444, sir? Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Do you see this, guys? Is this clear enough for you? Do you want me to zoom further? Huh? All right. That was Docker containers in whatever minutes did we. All right, guys. All right, guys. All right. Hope you're going to have a nice, beautiful weekend. Hope you enjoy this little bit of a tutorial of microservices, right? I'm gonna reference the microservice videos. There are pros and cons for microservices. You don't want to do microservices all the time. You need to understand what you're doing. Obviously, check out the microservices video. But gonna leave you here and see you in the next one. The code will be available in the description below, guys. Stay awesome.